Let's start with this dust-up between the President of the United States, President-elect of the United States, 4 more days, and Congressman John Lewis. Lewis started it. He's a civil rights icon. He's a hero in American history. He's also a Democratic politician who decided right before Inauguration Week to say he's an illegitimate president. Interestingly, as we wait to see if Congressman Lewis will talk about this on MLK Day, the First Lady of the United States, who we know has no love lost for Donald Trump, who we know remembers Donald Trump trying to delegitimize her husband's presidency. Thinking of Dr. King and great leaders like @Rep. John Lewis, who carry on his legacy, may their example be our call to action. Signed MO, meaning Michelle Obama personally sent this tweet. No direct reference to the illegitimate argument, but Michelle Obama cannot be unaware of the timing.
No question about it. And just the moment in time we're living in. Yes, Mr. Lewis started it this week. But if you talk to Democrats who are close to him, I've not spoken to him, but if you talk to Democrats close to him, they believe that Donald Trump started it early on with Barack Obama for years, questioning his citizenship and other things. So this is Congressman Lewis, a very smart congressman, but as you said, a Democratic politician. He knows exactly what he's doing, and now there are more than 25, maybe it's up to 27 or 28 members of Congress, Democrats, who are not coming to the inauguration. So this is kind of sad on one hand, I think, because, I mean, there is going to be a transfer of power. I was talking to Tim Scott last night, the Republican South Carolina African-American senator, and he stands with John Lewis on this in terms of Donald Trump. This may have been one of the tweets he should have let go, he told me.
Right.
He didn't.
And that's the thing, is Donald Trump's, it's so easy to bait him still. And it's also where he went with those tweets. He said John Lewis was a man, he implied he doesn't take action. He immediately maligned his district. I don't know, equating maybe because he's an African-American congressman that his district is poor. I mean, it was so offensive how he decided to take it to him and his district, and something he really could have just walked away from and rose above.
But how long have we been having this conversation? This goes all the way back to the beginning of the Trump candidacy, where people said, well, if you want to be combative, if you want to answer these, there's a different way to do it. He could have said, disappointed to hear that, John Lewis, I wish you would give me a chance.
Like Pence did.
I would love to sit down and talk to you about this. There's a number, any ways he could have been more diplomatic, but he is who he is.
There's nothing that angers Trump more than questioning the legitimacy of his presidency, and that's the whole reason why, or at least you could speculate the reason why he is so skeptical of Russia's involvement in the election and Russia having an impact on the election, because the more you talk about it, the more you may question whether or not he was elected fairly. So he is, anytime there's anybody who's questioning his legitimacy, he's going to push back very, very, very intensely.
And what does it tell us about the town we're sitting in? Normally, you're getting ready for Inauguration Week. Look, somebody wins and somebody loses in a presidential election. The other party always has sour feelings or hard feelings still. But this is the week they say, okay, it's time to celebrate our democracy. It's time to say we're going to give the new president a chance. We don't have any of that. What does this dust-up tell us, not just about John Lewis and Donald Trump, but more broadly about, A, the new president's relationship maybe with the African-American community, but the Democrats and that building behind us whose support he is going to need to get big things done?
It is clearly, it's never been in Trump's nature to back down, to apologize, to decline to respond to someone he feels has provoked him. And I think we can expect that to be the nature of his presidency going forward. As you said, Inauguration Week, traditionally a time to bring the country together, at least symbolically, if not in actual fact, and to give the big speech about how it's all one America and we're all in this together. And I think that Trump's actions over the past weekend have indicated that no matter what the words are in that speech, it is not going to be the case that he is able to bring people together at the point of his presidency that ought to be the sort of peak unity moment. And
John,
the question is, how does that translate going forward, right? What does that mean for policy? What does that mean for the way he actually attempts to govern? Is he doing damage to himself with the people he sees as his opponents on the other side of the aisle that he will not be able to recover?
And John, you can see the debate happening also within the Democratic Party about how to work with Trump. You have the centrists, moderates, conservative Democrats who need Trump supporters in their states, like Joe Manchin, criticizing those folks who are not coming to the inauguration. Then you have the more liberal members who want to stand firm and want to resist the Trump presidency. And you mentioned the African-American community, Trump getting about, 8% of the African-American vote. So that's where you're seeing so much resistance on Capitol Hill from the Congressional Black Caucus, people who do represent districts with large African-American voters. Those are the folks who are just so skeptical of Donald Trump's presidency. You saw that happen when they were tallying the electoral college vote. A number of them trying to object while they were doing that in the House of Representatives. So this debate playing out within the Democratic Party, we'll see which wing wins, the liberals or the moderates, when they start to debate policy.
You mentioned the tone you could possibly take. Listen here to Vice President-elect Mike Pence, who, by the way, made a stop at the Martin Luther King Memorial here in D.C. today with his family. It wasn't announced beforehand. He went down with his family. He was asked on Fox News this morning what he thinks of Congressman Lewis calling President-elect Trump illegitimate.
You'll see President-elect Trump take the oath of office, speak to the nation in his inaugural address, surrounded by 4 of the 5 living presidents. It is a testament to the world of the vibrancy of our democracy, and for someone of John Lewis's stature to lend credibility to the baseless assertions of those who question the legitimacy of this election is deeply disappointing. I hope he reconsiders it.
We'll see if he reconsiders it. I mean, I don't think he will. But the reality here is this is a bit of an academic exercise, an important one because, as Manu said, it affects policy, how things get done. But the reality here is, even if Democrats don't want to believe it, on Friday, in 4 days, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 45th president. So, this is something that's happening now. I would not be at all surprised if there is, in the future, a meeting with the president-elect or the president then and John Lewis or something. John Lewis has drawn attention to this. But he likes to bring history into things, and I think that he may ultimately rise above it. We'll see. But it's a sideshow, an important sideshow on a day like this, but the reality is Donald Trump will be the next president.